We have been watching this object for 11 weeks now, tracking it with our best telescopes, measuring its light, analyzing what we see. And for most of that time, everything made sense. The object behaved strangely. Yes, but we could measure what it was doing. We could record the data, we could study it. That changed 4 days ago, on February 4th, at 19 hours and 42 minutes Universal Time, something shifted. The spectrum of light coming from the object changed, and it changed in a way that pushed our instruments to their limits. Then beyond their limits, let me explain what I mean by spectrum. When we look at light from any object in space, we can split that light into colors. Like a rainbow, each color tells us something. It tells us what chemicals are present. It tells us how hot the object is. It tells us how fast it is moving. The spectrum is like a fingerprint. It gives us information. Let me explain what I mean by spectrum. When we look at light from any object in space, we can split that light into colors. Like a rainbow. Each color tells us something. It tells us what chemicals are present. It tells us how hot the object is. It tells us how fast it is moving. The spectrum is like a fingerprint. It gives us information. For 3i Atlas, we have been measuring this spectrum since December. The object releases gas, mostly water vapor and carbon monoxide, normal stuff for a comet. The spectrum showed clear lines, sharp peaks at specific wavelengths. We knew what we were looking at: water at this wavelength, carbon monoxide at that wavelength. Everything was clear. But on February 4th, those lines started to shift. They moved to different wavelengths. At first, we thought it was simple motion. When an object moves toward you, its light shifts to blue. When it moves away, it shifts to red. This is called Doppler shift. We see it all the time. It is normal. But the shift we saw was too large. 3i Atlas was moving at 41 kilometers per second relative to the Sun. We knew that speed. We had measured it precisely. The Doppler shift should have been a certain amount, a predictable amount. But what we saw was 3 times larger. 3 times what the motion alone could explain. That got our attention immediately. I was at Gemini Observatory when the data came in. We have a spectrograph there, a very good one. It can measure wavelengths very precisely. The technician called me over to look at the screen. She said the numbers looked wrong. She thought maybe the instrument was broken. I looked at the data. The emission lines had shifted by 47 nanometers. That is a huge shift for a spectrum. It would require the object to be moving at 123 kilometers per second toward us, but we knew it was not moving that fast. We could see it in the sky. We knew its position, its motion. This did not make sense. We checked the instrument. We ran calibration tests. We pointed at other stars to make sure everything was working. The instrument was fine. The problem was not on our end. The problem was the object itself. It was producing light with wavelengths that did not match what it should be producing. Within an hour, I contacted other observatories, Keck in Hawaii, the European Southern Observatory in Chile, telescopes in 3 different countries on 3 different continents. I asked them to look at 3i Atlas, to measure the spectrum, to tell me what they saw. They all saw the same thing: a massive wavelength shift. Lines that should be at certain positions were somewhere else entirely. And more troubling, the shift was increasing. Over the next 6 hours, we watched the lines move farther and farther from where they should be. By midnight UTC, the shift had reached 73 nanometers. Some of the emission lines had moved completely out of the visible spectrum. They had shifted into the ultraviolet. Our optical telescopes could no longer see them. We needed different instruments. Instruments designed to detect ultraviolet light. NASA has satellites that can do this. The Hubble Space Telescope can observe in ultraviolet, so can some of the newer satellites. We requested emergency observation time. This is not easy to get. These instruments are heavily scheduled. Astronomers book time months in advance, but this was unusual enough that they approved it. Within 18 hours, we had Hubble pointed at the object. What Hubble saw confirmed our worst suspicions. The emission lines had continued shifting. They were now deep in the ultraviolet, wavelengths around 200 nanometers. That is far from where they started, and they were still moving, still shifting to shorter wavelengths, still heading toward the extreme ultraviolet. Here is where things became serious. There is a limit to what wavelengths we can observe. Extreme ultraviolet light does not penetrate our atmosphere. You need to be in space to see it. And even our space telescopes have limits. Below about 90 nanometers, we need very specialized equipment that is rare. Equipment that was not pointed at this object. We could see the trajectory, we could predict where the lines were heading, and the predictions were disturbing. At the current rate of change, the spectrum would shift into wavelengths we could not observe. Wavelengths below 90 nanometers, wavelengths that would make the object invisible to our instruments. Not invisible to light, invisible to our ability to measure what it was made of. I want to be very clear about what this means. We would still see the object, it reflects sunlight, we could still track its position, but we would lose the ability to analyze it, to understand what it was doing. The spectrum gives us all our information about composition and chemistry and temperature. Without it, we are blind. We can see that something is there, but we cannot study it. NASA convened an emergency meeting, scientists from multiple institutions joined by video. I was on that call. We discussed what might be causing this shift. We considered every possibility we could think of. The first idea was instrument error. Maybe all our telescopes were wrong. Maybe there was some systematic problem affecting every observation, but this seemed unlikely. Different instruments, different designs, different teams, all seeing the same thing. That many independent errors pointing the same direction, that would be extraordinary. The second idea was new physics. Maybe the object was doing something we had never seen before. Maybe there was a process occurring that shifted wavelengths in unexpected ways, some kind of interaction between the gas and radiation, something we had not discovered yet. This was possible. Space contains phenomena we do not understand. But usually new physics shows up gradually. This was happening fast. The third idea was motion. Maybe the object was accelerating. Maybe it was speeding up in ways we had not detected. If it was moving faster, the Doppler shift would increase. That could explain the changing wavelengths, but our positional measurements showed no such acceleration. The object was following the path we predicted. No unexpected motion. The fourth idea was the one nobody wanted to say out loud, but someone eventually did. Maybe this was intentional. Maybe the object was deliberately changing its spectrum. Maybe it had some kind of control over the light it produced. That would require technology, that would require intelligence, that would mean this was not a natural object. I listened to that discussion very carefully. I have been in astronomy for 42 years. I have heard speculation about alien technology many times. Usually it comes from people outside the field. People who do not understand how science works. People who jump to conclusions. Scientists are usually more careful. We look for natural explanations first. We only consider artificial origins when we have eliminated everything else. But on that call, I heard serious scientists discussing this seriously. Not as wild speculation, as a possibility that needed to be evaluated, that told me how unusual this situation was. How far outside normal experience we had moved. The meeting ended without conclusions. We needed more data. We needed to watch what happened next. We needed to track this shift and see where it went. NASA approved continuous monitoring. Multiple satellites would watch the object, ground telescopes would coordinate observations, we would collect as much information as possible while we still could. That was 3 days ago. Since then, the spectrum has continued shifting. It has moved into wavelengths below 100 nanometers. Most of our optical instruments can no longer see the emission lines. We are relying on extreme ultraviolet satellites. Specialized equipment that was never designed for this purpose. Equipment that is barely capable of detecting what we need to detect. And this morning, we hit the limit. At 6 hours and 14 minutes UTC, the primary emission lines shifted below 85 nanometers. That is the cutoff for our best instruments. We can still detect some signal, we can see that something is there, but the resolution is poor. The data is noisy, we cannot make precise measurements anymore. We are effectively losing our ability to study this object. In another day, maybe 2, the spectrum will shift completely beyond our range. We will be blind. We will watch a visitor from interstellar space pass through our solar system, and we will not be able to analyze what it is made of. We will not understand what it is doing. This has never happened before. In the entire history of astronomy, we have never encountered an object whose spectrum shifted out of our observable range while we were watching it. Comets do not do this. Asteroids do not do this. Even the strangest objects follow predictable patterns. They stay within the range of wavelengths we can measure. Let me give you some context about how unusual this is. We have observed thousands of comets over the years. Every single one has shown emission lines in the visible or near ultraviolet, wavelengths between 300 and 700 nanometers. That is the normal range. That is where water and carbon monoxide and other common molecules emit light. Yes, some emissions occur at shorter wavelengths, some occur at longer wavelengths, but the main features are always in that visible range. Always, it is determined by the physics of how molecules interact with sunlight. Those physics do not change. They are fundamental properties of matter. For 3I Atlas to shift completely out of that range requires something extraordinary. Either the chemical composition is changing dramatically, or the temperature is changing dramatically, or something else is happening that we do not understand. Something that violates what we think we know about how matter behaves. I have been going through the data very carefully, looking for clues, trying to understand what could cause this. And I keep coming back to one observation that troubles me. The shift is smooth, it is continuous, it follows a very regular pattern, the wavelength decreases at a nearly constant rate, about 4 nanometers per hour. That is remarkably steady. Natural processes are rarely this steady. They fluctuate, they vary, they show irregularities, but this shift is like clockwork, as if it is controlled, as if something is regulating it precisely. I calculated what would be needed to produce this effect naturally. If changing temperature was the cause, the object would need to be heating up. Getting hotter would shift emissions to shorter wavelengths. That is basic physics, but the rate of heating required is enormous. The temperature would need to increase by thousands of degrees per hour. Nothing we know can heat up that fast without a massive energy source. Where would that energy come from? The sun is too far away. At the object's current distance, solar radiation is weak. It cannot provide enough heat. Internal radioactivity? Possible, but the object would need to contain enormous amounts of radioactive material. More than seems reasonable for something this size, and radioactive heating happens slowly, over millions of years, not over hours. Chemical reactions? Maybe the object contains chemicals that are reacting, releasing energy. But again, the rate is wrong. Chemical reactions on comets happen when ice turns to gas. That process is well understood. It does not produce the kind of rapid, steady heating we would need, and it does not explain why the shift started suddenly 4 days ago. Why not earlier? Why not later? I am running out of natural explanations. Every scenario I construct has problems. Every model I build fails to match what we observe. The more I analyze this, the more I am forced toward uncomfortable conclusions. Let me share something that happened yesterday. I received a phone call from a colleague at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, someone I have known for many years, someone whose judgment I trust. He told me that internal discussions at NASA have become tense. There is disagreement about how to interpret what we are seeing. Some scientists think this is a natural phenomenon we simply do not understand yet. Some exotic process involving plasma or magnetic fields or quantum effects, something that will make sense once we study it more. They want to continue observations, collect more data, build better models, the standard scientific approach. But others are less certain. They point to the precision of the shift, the steady rate, the timing. They ask questions that are harder to answer. Why did this start now? Why is it so regular? What mechanism could produce such controlled behavior? And they do not like the answers they are getting. My colleague told me something else. He said there are contingency plans being discussed. Plans for what to do if the spectrum shifts completely out of range. Plans for how to maintain some level of observation even when we cannot measure composition. He said the word priority has been used, as in, this is now a priority project. Resources are being redirected, other programs are being delayed. That tells me something important. Organizations like NASA do not shift priorities lightly. They plan years in advance. They have commitments, they have schedules. To disrupt those plans requires serious justification. Someone high up has decided this object deserves extraordinary attention. Someone has concluded this is more than just another unusual comet. I do not know what data they have that I do not have. I do not know what they are seeing in the classified analysis, but I know that response. I recognize what it means, and it makes me very uneasy. Let me tell you what I think is happening. I want to be careful here. I want to be clear that this is speculation. This is not proven. This is my interpretation based on 4 decades of experience and 3 months of watching this object. I think 3I Atlas is changing deliberately. I think the spectrum shift is controlled. I think something about this object can regulate the wavelengths of light it produces. And I think it is doing so in a way designed to move beyond our observational range. Why would it do this? I can think of one reason: privacy. If you were a probe from another civilization, if you were passing through an alien solar system, if you detected that the inhabitants had technology capable of analyzing you, would you allow that analysis? Or would you protect your information? Would you make yourself unreadable? That sounds like science fiction. I know how it sounds, but I cannot construct a better explanation. Every natural scenario I consider fails. The precision is wrong, the timing is wrong, the pattern is wrong. What I am left with is something I would not have believed 3 months ago. The possibility that we are observing intelligence, the possibility that this object knows we are watching, and it does not want to be studied. Tomorrow morning, NASA will attempt one final detailed spectrum measurement. They are using resources that were reserved for other projects. They are pulling in every favor they have. The goal is to capture the highest quality data possible before the wavelengths shift beyond reach. This may be our last chance to learn what this object is made of. Our last chance to understand what it is doing. I will be watching those results very carefully. I will be looking for any clue, any hint of what is really happening here, because I believe this matters. I believe this is important, not just for astronomy, for everything. If I am right, if this object is artificial, if it is controlled by intelligence, then we are not alone. Then there are others out there, others who travel between stars, others who have technology far beyond ours, others who have reached this solar system. That changes everything we thought we knew about our place in the universe. And if I am wrong, if there is some natural explanation I have not thought of, then we are about to discover new physics, new chemistry, new processes that can occur in space that also changes what we know, that also matters. Either way, what happens with 3I Atlas in the next 48 hours is significant. Either way, we are watching something extraordinary, something that will be remembered, something that marks a turning point in our understanding. I want you to pay attention to this. I want you to follow what happens next. Share this with others who care about these questions. Help spread the word that something unusual is occurring, that we have an opportunity to witness something rare, something that may not happen again in our lifetimes, because in my 42 years studying the cosmos, I have never seen anything like this. I have never felt this combination of excitement and concern. I have never been this uncertain about what I am looking at, and uncertainty means we are at the edge of knowledge, at the boundary of what we understand. That is where discoveries happen. That is where everything changes. 3I Atlas is out there right now, moving through our solar system, changing in ways we cannot fully observe, shifting beyond the reach of our instruments. And we have perhaps 2 days to learn what we can. 2 days before it becomes a mystery we can see but cannot solve. 2 days before it passes beyond our ability to study it. The clock is running, the wavelengths are shifting, and we are running out of time to understand what this visitor from the stars is trying to hide, or what it is trying to protect, or what it simply is. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring about these questions. Stay curious. Keep watching, because the universe is showing us something remarkable, and we need to pay attention while we still can.